I don't know why I'm here talking to a group of people that are already interested in Livonia, or at least you're pretending to, or you knew that this building was air conditioned and it was a good place to go for what I think is Indian summer. Oh, and I see Jackie over here. She's going off to Texas for 3.5 weeks. She ran for council this year. I had never met her, never seen her anywhere in my life. Now, all of a sudden, I can't turn around without seeing her. I go to Rotary Park to help on one day when they're planting trees and cleaning it up, and she's there. Then I see that she's joined the society, and I'm thinking, is there anything else that you want to do?
All the things.
All the things. Well, thank you for all that you're doing and proving that when you're a candidate, you don't disappear afterwards. You get, in fact, more involved than ever. And Rose worked with her two relatives at the Touch-A Truck. And when I think about that, they took 200 Touch-A Truck Hot Wheels that I had donated. I had 6,000 donated this year. She took a box of 200 up to her church in Pontiac, and they're passing them out at Christmas to children that are less fortunate than the rest of us. And so I want to thank you, Rose, for one, bringing your two relatives, nephews, niece?
Grandnephew and granddaughter.
Oh, don't put great in front of it. It makes you older than you really are. That's all right. I moved here in 1959. Probably some of you have been in Livonia longer than I have. But I remember living in Decatur, Georgia, and Mom and Dad told me we're moving. Mom was out visiting her family in California. Dad took Bob and I out to dinner at Howard Johnson's, if you can picture that. Remember Howard Johnson's? Oh, I used to love it all the time. So we were there, and Dad said, we're moving to Livonia, Michigan. I said, where is that? And he says, it's outside of Detroit, and it's south of Windsor. And I'm thinking, well, no, Windsor's in Canada, that's north. And he said, no, Windsor, anyway. He tried to go into it. It didn't make sense. I had no idea. We stayed at the hotel on Plymouth Road there at Ann Arbor Road where they meet. I don't even know what it is now. I think it's got, what do you call it? The old things that you used to put quarters in when you parked your car, parking meters. I can't even remember that. I think they now rent the rooms by the hour, but we stayed there in room 14 for 1 week between Christmas and New Year before we moved into our house over on on Indiana Street. That's how I learned the names of all the states, but I didn't learn where they were at. And I well remember moving into that house. There were 19,000 people living in Livonia, 19,000. Or at that time, there were 19,000 in 1950. When we moved in, there was 100,000 people that were projected to live in Livonia. They said that we would probably hit 150,000. We never did. So now we're sitting in right at 94,000. My first date was to Wonderland Shopping Center. First date with Cookie Secord. Still remember her with a fondness. Oh, yeah, my first date. We would walk the 2 miles to Wonderland once or twice a week because it was easy to do. And it was a site, how many ever remember the airport that used to be there? You remember the airport. It was right across from the Ford parts plant, and they had an airport there from the 1940s through the 1950s until Wonderland Center was built on that site. I think if we had had that maintained as an airport, just like Metatol is in Canton on the border with Plymouth, you and I could have all had a historical society plane, and we could have gone out and had our meetings all around the Midwest instead of right here at Greenmead. So Wonderland Shopping Center was the height of the 1950s, except most people don't remember that in 1955, the city council, of which a man who became judge was on the council at the time, Jim McCann. His son is an attorney now. He became a judge. And the council said, we need something to attract younger families into town, and one of the things we need is medical care. So in 1955, they met with the Felician Sisters and said, we want a hospital. Well, it only took almost 5 years, and St. Mary's Hospital was built, and that was the first step towards making Livonia a total community. Because the Felicians had taken that half square mile in 1928 and built the Mother House and built a university. And something else was happening back then that set the tone for Livonia was when the Sheldon Land Company, who was used to building houses in Detroit, decided they were going to come out here to this rural agrarian farmland, and they were going to build a subdivision called Rosedale Gardens. But the problem was nobody was buying the houses. It was too far out. So what they did was say, we need a faith unit in this neighborhood. So they donated the property to Rosedale Gardens Presbyterian Church, which opened in 1930, and St. Michael's, the Catholic school. And so we had Catholic and Presbyterian located right there. That began to fill in Rosedale Gardens and then Rosedale Meadows, and that became the center of town. When we moved here in 59, December of 59, I remember, I still have it, the brochure that had shop in downtown Livonia, Sheldon Center. And so we had a carnival at Sheldon Center. We had a parade on Plymouth Road. That was the epicenter of this community. And everybody would go shopping there, and then they could go down 2 miles to Montgomery Ward's and go down to Federal's. Remember, whoever shopped, my first bicycle was at Federal's. Do you remember Federal's? And okay, see, you all know all this. I don't know why I'm repeating it. So we had all of that. And then, so over the course of the years, 1955, let's go back 5 years before that. People that lived at the DRC, the Detroit Race Course, who all used to lose their money at the DRC? You did? Right here. She lost her money at the DRC. One time? Okay. Well, what happened is that the people that lived there decided they wanted to become a city. And if you've heard this story, I apologize. So they started circulating petitions to make that 1 square mile the city of Livonia. Think about that. They would have had all the money from the racetrack. There were only a handful of people that lived there at the time. So the fathers in Livonia, including Carl Wagenschutz, who went on to become our treasurer, and several other, I can't remember their names now. I should have written them down, but you know what? I don't remember. And so they decided they would circulate petitions in 49. The voters in May of 50 passed the ordinance that set up the city of Livonia, so we beat them to it. At the same time that was going on, Nankin Township, just to the south of us, wanted to incorporate a part of Livonia Township. So we had two things we were blocking. Westland taking over Livonia, and the racetrack becoming Livonia. So we had 36 square miles with 2 school districts, including the oldest school district in the state of Michigan at Clarenceville, which started 2 years before the state before we became a state. So we start out with the petitions to keep Livonia 36 square miles. We started out with having the hospital, then Wonderland Shopping Center. There's not much else to do, but we were changing mayors every 2 or 4 years. And so we went, Bill Brashear, who was a noted attorney in town, was running, and Harvey Mulkey, an insurance agent on Plymouth Road, went to Rosedale Church, was running against him, and he won. Well, what did he want to do? Well, he was a big fan of Orville Hubbard. And I won't go into any more detail about that because that's another topic another day. But what he did do was bring 3 people that transformed our city for generations and decades to come. He hired 3 people. John Dufour, head of our Parks and Recreation program from Dearborn, who also was a former kicker with the Toronto Argonauts in the Canadian Football League. He at the same time hired Harry Tadigan from the law department and brought him over here in 1966. And then he brought in Dan Andrew, the city planner from Dearborn. Those three people shaped our city, and if we ever had a monument, a Mount Rushmore, they would be the only three that I would put on it. Because what did those three do? Well, John Dufour, 2 years after he was here, formed an alliance with somebody by the name of Geraldine Joyner. Happened to have been my mother, who was the first woman elected to the school board. And he said, if we don't buy property now, Legal, you were probably here then, right? Dennis, you were a dentist back then, so you remember all this. So what did he do? Well, John Dufour said, let's buy the property now for our parks before the price goes up. So lo and behold, he took bus tours of new residents around the city as our population began to increase and said, we're going to buy, and he did. The parkland that we now have with our 65 parks in the city, the largest parkland in the state of Michigan outside of the city of Detroit, right here in Livonia because of John Dufour. Second person that made the big impact as he continued his effort was Dan Andrew. Dan Andrew created the industrial belt. He said we need to restrict our industrial growth to between Plymouth Road and Schoolcraft, that 1 mile. The only difficulty was there was a concrete plant where the Kroger is on 5 Mile now, just east. How many shop at Kroger? Anybody? Well, a few of you did. What?
It was an aggregate.
It was what's an aggregate?
Well, working with more than just concrete.
Okay, it was an aggregate. Right here. She said it. She said it. Betty said it was an aggregate. But it was this big, ugly building. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Okay, so they finally, under Ed McNamara, got rid of it, bought them out, moved them, and they were gone. But what they wanted to do at the time was have that stretch be our industrial belt. Big transformation in Livonia. Also wanted all of our mile roads, north, south, east, west paved. Let the development come later. Look at all the problems that a lot of cities are having when they're now putting in residential neighborhoods, but they haven't got the roads for them. We put our roads in first, the residents came in second. That was the thing that Dan Andrew. But more importantly, Dan Andrew sat down with Don Friedrich, who was the former principal at Bentley High School, and sat down and became assistant superintendent for community affairs, of community relations, whatever it's called now, and said, let's have a way that we can get more young families. A recreation center. Why in the world would we want recreation? Well, they appointed 2 people to chair a committee. Phil Power, 28 years old, had just purchased the Observer newspapers from our state senator, who died right after he started his term. And his wife, Myra Chandler, took it over and sold it to Phil Power. So he was on the way to becoming a major newspaper publisher in the state of Michigan. And the second co-chair of this drive, I'll tell you what they were going to raise money for, was, maybe you remember him, the last Detroit and Telskubik and Verlander that won the Cy Young, the Cy Young pitching, and that was Denny McClain. So they were in charge of the fundraising. They recruited about 100 men, mostly. There may have been some women, but I never heard of any, because back then, Livonia was pretty much a male-dominated governance organization. And so my dad was one, knocking doors, collecting $25 and $50 from as many people as they could. They raised enough money, and we built a YMCA. And that YMCA brought in a slew of people to our community, and until it closed 4 years ago, because our own recreation center was too successful. So the recreation center, the Y, created by Dan Andrew in partnership with the schools. Again, a partnership. That's a part of Livonia's history that we've always had in place. Hand in glove, working together. Another thing that happened in the early 70s, well, the third person, let's see, who did I mention? Dan Andrew. Oh, Harry Tadigan. How can I forget Harry? You ever go on a walk down the Tadigan Trail in Livonia? Named after him with good reason. I remember my last day working for Ed McNamara as his administrative assistant. We were on our way to Plymouth for lunch. He decided he'd treat me to a nice lunch at what used to be called the Round Table Club in downtown at the Mayflower Hotel. And so we were driving down 8 Mile, and I said, Ed, it's that way. Why are we going this way? And he said, well, I want to show you something. Back then, 8 Mile was just the 2 lanes with a shoulder. He pulled over, going the opposite way, parked in front of the Hill House, and said, what do you think if the city owned this? I said, no, what do you mean own it? Well, there's several hundred acres here. I've just assigned this morning, before we left, for Harry Tadigan to negotiate the purchase of the Hill House. And he did. And the city bought it. And I remember donating the article in the Observer to the Greenmead, in which the plan was to make this all a farm, practicing farm, just the way it was in the 1800s. So we got Greenmead in the 70s, but we're still in the 60s. We had industrial, we had recreation, and we had parks. So that was going along famously as we began to become more of a location, not a destination for people moving into Michigan. And then in the early 70s, Ed McNamara came in, actually 69, and defeated Harvey Mulkey in what was the first negative piece of campaign literature ever run in Livonia. And it was a picture of Ed McNamara's house and the taxes that he paid, and a picture of Harvey Mulkey's house and the taxes that he paid. And he said, is it fair that the mayor is paying less money than I am or you are? Well, whatever happened, he won. And so Harvey Mulkey was out of office. Ed McNamara took over. And of course, one of his first appointments was me as his administrative assistant. I think it was at the time John Dufour had stopped me. I had just graduated from Central Michigan. He said, do you have a job? And I said, no. He said, well, come on, I got an idea for you. So he recommended, and so I worked for 1.5 years with Ed McNamara. Best 1.5 years I'd ever had. I learned more about golf. I mean, he had a nice relationship with all the people that worked for him. He suggested that every time we go to a meeting at night, we needed to take an hour off during the day. So most Friday mornings at 8 o'clock, I would tee off because inevitably I was at 2 council meetings that week. But we also worked hard, and he was good for that. I'm sitting at my desk one day, and this is another transformation that created an opportunity for Livonia to show cooperation between the schools and the city. A woman by the name of Electra Stamalos. I bet nobody remembers her. A world-renowned watercolorist, professor at U of M, first Eastern Michigan, then U of M. And her claim to fame was she traveled the world as president of the Watercolor Society of the Globe, or whatever it's called. But she comes walking in, as only she can. I'd like to see the mayor. Well, so I went over and asked the secretary, and she said, sure. I said, what do you want to talk about? She said, well, there's a barn that's about to be torn down. Well, what do you mean? She said, it's called the Wilson Barn, where Wilson Dairy was established. And so the bank has just bought it, and they want to tear it down and put a bank branch there. She said, we can't have it. So lo and behold, what happened over the next 4 months was that Bob Bennett on the city council, my mother on the school board, Ed McNamara, got together with the JCs. At the time, we had 200 members, and we collected 5,000 signatures in 30 days of residents saying, let's save the Wilson Barn. Well, now, who was in charge of that? Well, there was a Lynn Wozniak, there was a Jerry Brown was on the council, his wife Sharon, and my wife at the time, Paula. And they collected 5,000 signatures. The Wilson Barn became a 3-way land swap between school property, city property, and the Wilson Barn, so that the barn could stay intact to this day. Otherwise, that would have been a real detriment if we cut it down. But that's a part of the transition in the city of Livonia, the transformation from a rural agrarian community to now where we can actually network, have people working together, and involve our service organizations, of which it's a tragedy to say no longer exist. To the extent, at that time, the Rotary Club had over 200 members. The JCs had over 200 members. We had a strong Kiwanis Club started by Fernan Feenstra from who was on the city council, business and professional women. All of these groups enhanced the image and reputation of Livonia. And why? Because they were all young families. They all were looking for something to do, not only for themselves, but for their children throughout the community. And since then, with the demise of our service organizations, we no longer see that kind of connectedness. And instead, what we see today is that instead of service organizations taking charge and working to make things happen, we're seeing our social media and it taking charge of everything. And that is, I think, to the detriment of many communities, and I think it is to this one. But in the 70s, so we're continuing to build, we're continuing to move up. And what are we seeing now? A transformation into something different than what we had. Showstack bought out Wonderland Shopping Center, our original shopping destination. And what did they do with it? Well, they put in 2 big box stores, promised us a third store, and said at the meeting, the old man Showstack, not the original, but the second tier, now they're down in the 3rd and the 4th generation, said, we've got one ready to sign. Well, that was 12 years ago, and so what did they wind up doing? They wound up suing the city, and when they sued the city, what did they get? They got high-rise apartments and a car wash, and the city had no choice. That's where we come. When Laurel Park was first built, and this is where the transition comes, we used to have the kind of cooperation between our community governance and our business community. The old man, I say that with respect because I'm an old man too, that the Showstack and Ed McNamara sat down, and Showstack said, this is how I want it to look, this is the design we're going to do, and Ed says, I think it's beautiful, let's do it and move. Took it to the council, and Laurel Park was built, and it was the luxury mall that brought people from all around to that. Now, that same company, instead of sitting down and talking, decides we're going to file a lawsuit and block the city from doing anything that we don't want. And then they buy the Kmart property, and they sat on it for 15 years. And then finally, the city had to agree with what they're building, which I happen to think is okay. And why did they just approve it? Well, I'll tell you what, they didn't want to be sued again and lose. We've become such a litigious society. All of the communities around us at one point in time looked to Livonia for leadership. When we wanted a YMCA and recreation, everybody else wanted one. When we had recreation and bought up property for parks, they wanted that. So they looked to Livonia for the leadership, and that's the transformation that carried us to become the preeminent destination in western Wayne County. And that's where we're at right now. He told me I can't go beyond 2:45, so I've got 7 minutes. I'm sorry. You were very good about that. So now we've got 94,000 people. Our service clubs are starting to see a resurgence, and actually this club is growing bigger than any other service club that we've got. And you're not a service club, but you are, in fact, you're accomplishing something, but you need to take it a step further. I don't believe that there's a single member that's an elected official in Livonia that belongs to the Historical Society. Am I right? Just say yes, Bill, you are. Okay. What's that? Okay, well, but here's the point that I think we need to make. Too many of our elected officials in every community think that history started the day they got elected. They have no concept or idea from the petitions in 1949 to become a city, to sitting down with the Felician sisters and negotiating to build a hospital, to talking it over with community residents to build a YMCA and actually putting together a network, which reminds me, My dad knocked doors. We come from a not very well-off family. My dad worked his tail off for 43 years for Burroughs downtown. That's what brought us here. He worked up on 2nd Avenue. And so he went to join the Y right after it opened and was real proud. I remember I went with him. And he said, well, I'd like to join. And they said it'll be $1,000. My dad said, no, I raised $5,000. Doesn't matter. So he never, to his dying day when he was 93, talked about how the fact that he could never take his family to the YMCA, but that he had helped to raise the funding for it. Now, I regret he was just a soldier, but that's okay. I think now we need to do more to encourage and invest in our citizens to become active and to take ownership of what is happening in our city. Now, we go through Bob Bennett, who probably was his claim to fame, without any hesitation at all, was his support for the historical and art and culture in Livonia. When the next big event was after the 60s, was Bob Bennett in the early 70s saying we need a library. And so he took together a coalition of people. I don't know why he and my mom and dad got along so well, but Mom, Dad, where are you going? Oh, we're going over to the Bennetts. We got a campaign committee for the new library. Okay, that's wonderful. I'm happy for you. And so a whole group of, I don't know, dozens of people, and it passed overwhelmingly. That was the next transformation because every other community wanted to have a library and look like Livonia. So we built the library appropriately named after Bob and Janet Bennett. But they also, when Bob Bennett was a kind of mayor, when he finished his term limited, decided that he had $13,000 left in his campaign fund. Instead of spending it on himself, giving it to his children, he set up the Livonia Community Foundation and used that as the seed money, which now has over $1 million, thanks to Bob Bennett. Now, I remember when Bob Bennett, Bob Bishop, who was then the treasurer, and two others, I think Bill Freed was one, they visited me in Canton. I had started the Canton Community Foundation, and they wanted to know how you did it. So I had a fundraiser going. They came to it. Next thing I know, Livonia is announcing that they've got a community foundation with his $13,000 as seed money. So the formation of that community foundation by a mayor going out of office was a part of the transition that took us a little bit further into the future. And I think that that is an acknowledgement. But he and his wife were so supportive of this property. In fact, where the post office is, the post office was about to leave their Middle Belt 7-mile building. They were going to say goodbye. And he said, no, we need you in the northwest corner of Livonia. So he and Harry Tadigan came up with a plan, never been done in the state. In fact, I don't know this with certitude, but I think they had to set up a new state law to allow them to do it. They sold that property to the to the post office, and that property there at that post office was used as money, as seed money for green meat, so that good people like Sue Bailey, who's walking out on me, decides that's all right. I'm gonna. Yes, you are. I know. I saw you. But they wanted to plow more money back in here, and that's why the post office is there, and that's why there's a foundation upon which this Greenmead can tap into. And they were very active. Jack Kirksey's wife, who passed 3 years ago, and Janet Bennett started their home tours at Christmas or spring, I can't remember which, and they should have used your house. Have you ever had it on a home tour? Oh, if it isn't next year, it should be. The home tour, oh, Sue's back. And so that was Bob Bennett's legacy, a people person. Ed McNamara was the visionary who fought Southeast Michigan government, primarily, Coleman Young. In fact, Livonia was so hated by Coleman Young. When I became a Wayne County commissioner, and I'm down there, I noticed that there's a crack in the door, and there's a group, all of the Detroit commissioners are in this one room. And this is what they said. I stood outside and listened. They were talking to Coleman Young, because you got to know Coleman Young's voice, right? I mean, if you hear him, you know what he sounds like. And he says, we got to do everything we can to defeat Bill Joyner, because he's friends with Ed McNamara. Oh my gosh, I'm just a short, chubby, fat guy serving on the county commission, and they're already trying to get rid of me. I served 3 terms, but after that they got rid of me. He fought the water rights. They wanted to increase our water bill. He said, no, not without representation. So Livonia gathered the reputation of being one to stand up for Western Wayne County on every occasion that we can. That was a part of his legacy. Bob Bennett's legacy was art and culture and history. And then we came into the Jack Kirksey era, and Jack Kirksey became a part of he's the longest serving mayor we've ever had, 16 years, I believe. And then Dennis Wright, who served 1 term and unfortunately passed 2 years ago, good man. Jack Ingebrigtsen, who served for 1 term. I call him the gentleman mayor. He was so cordial and so friendly with everybody, and probably as polite a mayor as I've ever seen. And then we got Maureen Brosnan, who came in and served as mayor. But how many know who Mike Duggan is? Of course you do, because he is arguably the next governor of Michigan. I'm not so sure who I'm supporting, but we've got quite a few in Livonia that are supporting Mike Duggan. But when he lived in Livonia, Jack Kirksey said, we want a recreation center. So how are we going to do that? Well, let's put it to the voters. So who did he ask to chair the campaign? Mike Duggan. And Mike Duggan was there and got it passed. I am convinced to this day that had we had social media, it never would have passed, because there were people that felt that the city could not afford it, that the base would not provide enough funding to pay the bond issue off. And so there was some consideration, but at that time, we only had 1 paper in town, the Livonia Observer, owned by Phil Power, who was not going to oppose anything that the city of Livonia wanted. So they wrote often about the passage of it. So that was the transition there for Jack Kirksey, and then we're at where we're at today. Now I want to mention Greenmead just for a minute. I remember when Lynn Banks was our county commissioner, and Lynn Banks she wrote often that Greenmead is the perfect gateway into Livonia. Everybody coming in here from Northville, Plymouth, Novi, they go right by Greenmead. It was always her dream that this would be a gateway into the community. And I have to tell you, Emily has transformed this organization. Would you agree, Sue? Yes. Sue, I'm talking to you. Okay, wake up, Sue. There we go. I'm joking. And there's more activities, more things going here, that in 1974, when the city looked with Harry Tatajan to purchase it, none of this was here at all. And so now it's moving on and moving forward. So that is pretty much the way I see. Now, I lived in Plymouth for 26 years. When I built a house in Livonia on Gill Road, and then we're out one Sunday, and all of a sudden I see a house that I wanted to buy in Plymouth. I did. Bought it on Labor Day, moved in on Christmas. January 1st, I was a county commissioner. Don't understand how that works, but there I was. So I stayed there for 26 years before I decided it was time to move back to Livonia and support the hometown that I was raised in. Franklin High School graduate, and my wife was a Stevenson, at the time was a Stevenson graduate. She passed 4 years ago. So we have a great school district, and Claresville is not to be undermined. That makes a significant part. They've got anybody live in the Claresville district? Because you do. Yeah, you've got a millage proposal, bond proposal in November. Did you know that? No. Nobody knows that. So what do we have? We have groups in this town that in fact are sharing that story, and the best researcher of Livonia history is Kathy Bilger. Now I think, yeah, right. And you know what? No, it's not. It's Don. Don's doing the work. You're putting your name on it. Yeah, I understand. I know how that is the truth. I know he proofreads or tries to, right, Don?
He's my best editor.
So we've got all of these. The development of culture was another major part of the development of Livonia. And I'll tell you why. We have 21 art and cultural organizations in Livonia. Nobody comes close to it. When you think about it, 1966, John Dufour said, when the Livonia Civic Chorus, who was at a church, when they lost their sponsorship, John Dufour came in and said, let's make it ours. So they've been around since 1966, and so you figure out the years. I was sitting in Ed McNamara's office when de Blasio, at the time was the director of the Oakway Symphony, primarily in Farmington, came in and said, I live in Livonia, I want it to be a Livonia Symphony. So Ed said, okay. So lo and behold, 1975 or 6, I think, we had the Livonia Symphony. They're in their 61st year. And I'm going to mention that. Sue, I just dropped off to her season tickets for the year for this. I have worked out an arrangement. I don't know if any of you read my Friday Musings. We're up to over 7,000 readers, subscribers. And so I've worked out an arrangement with the symphony that anybody that asks me, I've got enough, not many, I've got a few left. If you want 2 season tickets for each of the 4 concerts, I can give them to you, but you have to write your name out, give me your email address, give me your address, and I will get you the season tickets to the symphony. Been around since, and Sue just got hers. Yay, you're going to go. That's right. I love the symphony. They meet up at Clarenceville, and we'd like to fill it this year, their 61st year. We've got a youth chorus with 30 members. Do you know that how many groups that we've got in Livonia? And they're not in other communities. We have a Motor City Youth Theater that just renovated their building down in the southeast corner of town. They've been around for over almost 50 years. In Livonia for 30 years. They were at the Masonic Temple. They now are practicing here in this town, and they're phenomenal. If you've never been to that theater, just stop by and take a look at it. We've got the Livonia Community Theater. Anybody go to Shakespeare in the Park this year? 3 years in a row. Did you like it?
Yeah.
Yep, 3 years in a row. Shakespeare in the Park. There's one in Royal Oak, there's one in Ann Arbor, and there's one in Livonia. So when you think about it, once again, the transformation of our city from a small rural town in 1949 to where we are today, from 19,000 people up to 94,000 people, with over 20 art organizations, with 65 parks, with the gateway to all of southeastern Michigan at Greenmead. That all started how? A hospital in 55, Wonderland Shopping Center, the Livonia Mall, which I used to hang out at. Now, how many here believe in freedom of speech? Okay, I'm walking down the Livonia Mall. I'm going there for the Coney Island. I like Coney Island. And the theater, $2 movies you could go to. So I'm walking down there, and I'm not going to be profane, but a kid comes walking towards me, long hair, like I used to be in college, and he had a T-shirt on that said, F blank, 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 you. And so I'm walking along, and I turned around, and I said back to him. He said, why did you tell me that? I said, well, you said it to me first. He said, no, I would never say that. I said, look at your shirt. He said, oh, I didn't know I had it on. Really? That's all right. Those were the issues that our school district in the 60s and 70s that were always, my mother was tried to be recalled. Why? Because she supported sex education. And so Harvey Mulkey, who my mom and dad had helped get elected the first time and then worked for Ed McNamara in his second election. Oh, you've got a Harvey Mulkey. Look at that. Bumpers. Where'd you get that? That's awesome. When I moved back to Livonia 23 years ago, I gave all of my historical political literature going back to 1969 here. I have no idea where it's at. Would you know, Sue? It was a big stack of stuff. No, I should have. Yeah, but not above your pay grade. You know what? I'm 3 minutes over, so I'm going to leave it right there, and I hope that you've had as much fun as I have, and I will look forward to sticking around a little bit longer. Thank you so much.